You've probably heard this before, Chopin's Funeral March. For nearly 2 centuries, it has been a musical archetype, evoking images of solemn processions, Gothic structures, and black garb. However, it's only a fragment of Chopin's Sonata No. 2. Despite facing his own mortality, Chopin complemented his death-centered masterpiece with moments like this, conveying hope, contentment, a life well lived. Take the first familiar sound by on its own, and you have what is probably now considered a cartoonish level of despair. But listen to the sonata as a whole, and you get a silver lining intertwined with riffs as odd as life itself. Now the real question is, what does all this have to do with The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask? Everything.
Yes!
Hey, listen, we know Ocarina of Time as the groundbreaking success that brought the Legend of Zelda series into the 3rd dimension. It was gorgeous for its time, its lock-on combat was a game changer, and it gave its cast of characters an emotional depth unseen in previous titles. After Link's Awakening, Zelda fans had to wait 5 whole years for the next installment, and in 1998, we finally got the 3D game of our dreams. Majora's Mask had to follow that. This was that game that built upon the success of its older brother, while simultaneously creating its own identity, all within the incredible time constraint of 1 year. How was Nintendo able to deliver on this Herculean task? They must have rebuilt it. Bigger, stronger, more enemies, more dungeons, more weapons, more grand expanses of open world to explore. And at the end of it all, a showdown with Ganon unlike the land of Hyrule had ever seen before it, right? Well, no. Nintendo wisely recognized their time constraint. Instead of making the game bigger, they balled up Ocarina's design and rolled it down an unsettling rabbit hole. Majora's Mask is one of the few direct sequels to a Zelda game. As is tradition, you take on the role of a young green-clad warrior named Link, but specifically, you're the same Link that recently saved Hyrule in Ocarina of Time. While in search of his famously annoying fairy companion, Link encounters Skull Kid, who is in possession of the almighty Majora's Mask, or you might say, the mask is in possession of him. Skull Kid has summoned the moon to descend and obliterate the land of Termina in 3 days. Link must free the giant guardians of Termina in order to stop the moon from falling, and then separate Skull Kid from the malicious Majora's Mask. The game handles similarly to Ocarina in terms of combat and exploration. You get similar gear like swords, shields, bombs, and bows, but you also get an array of new abilities thanks to the masks you collect. Some have a very specific use, while others full-on transform Link into a different race, allowing him more variety in terms of fighting and puzzle solving. Furthermore, the various masks dictate how the inhabitants of Termina respond to Link, contributing to the game's emphasis on interpersonal relationships. But perhaps even more notable than the masks is the progression of time over a 3-day cycle, ending with Termina's demise. Thankfully, one of the many songs Link has in his repertoire can turn back time and start this cycle all over again. Now look, Majora's Mask is my favorite 3D Zelda game of all time. Yes, Breath of the Wild is great. Yes, I love Twilight Princess. And yes, Skyward Sword is a Zelda game. But for me, it's all about the mask. I don't deny that the circumstances surrounding my first playthrough back in the 4th grade are what envelops this game in warm nostalgia for me. My older brother and I don't share many interests, but he's the one that took me to pick up that sweet golden N64 cartridge of Majora's Mask, and the two of us spent every hour we could together getting lost in Link's oddest adventure yet. Couple this nostalgia with the fact that Majora's Mask checks so many boxes for what I consider a game to be great, and it's no surprise that it got a completed for my video for the original version. I went so far to say that completing it was the only way to feel like I had actually beaten it. Fulfilling all of those side quests and obtaining that special completion bonus, we'll get to that later, is a must for me because it adds so much to the gameplay and to the story. And that's just how I felt about the original version. Majora's Mask 3DS was, by and large, an improvement, so it's even less surprising that I gave it a completed as well. Now, I've been around long enough to experience the double-edged sword of remakes and remasters. Some surpass all expectations, while some left me wondering, why? Why? Having completed both the original and 3DS versions of Majora's Mask multiple times at this point, comparing the two is pretty effortless, especially since I tackled both back to back for my recent live streams for New Game Plus. While I love them both, one pulls ahead as the clear frontrunner, making me wonder if I'll ever revisit the other again. I can say with confidence that the 3DS release of Majora's Mask is the superior experience in my opinion by just a little bit. At a glance, it seems very much like the same game as the original, but with the obvious benefit of being cleaner, more vibrant, and overall a nicer look to it. But in playing both versions to completion, I found far more resounding reasons as to why I'd recommend the 3DS version to those both familiar and unfamiliar with Majora's Mask. Exhibit A, maps appearing on the 3DS as a second screen is useful beyond measure. As a kid, I remember getting turned around time and time again, especially in the Great Bay Temple. This happened less with subsequent playthroughs of the original version, but even if I had played it again right now, I know I would still lose my sense of direction. In comparison, the first time I experienced the second screen map of the 3DS, I was amazed by the efficiency of how I was able to navigate. I felt like I was now playing areas like the Great Bay Temple the way they were meant to be played, with more emphasis on combat and puzzles and less on trying to memorize my surroundings. And with my recent 3DS playthrough, I knew where I was going 100% of the time. Easier navigation made this recent 3DS playthrough by far the speediest. Treasure chest locations were easier to remember, and collecting hidden fairies more quickly meant I was able to sooner receive upgrades like enhanced defense and a super spin attack. And it's not like I played the original Majora's Mask and needed the game to be easier. It's just that adding things like this second screen map smoothed out the roughness of the original, making the remaster a superior streamlined experience. Speaking of streamlined, more control over the progression of time on the 3DS was a feature that I relished in even more this time around. With my recent back-to-back playthrough of both versions, I was unwittingly speedrunning much of them due to being so familiar with Majora's Mask. However, it was 3D's added adjustment of time control that was a huge aid in zipping through that version. In the original, you can use the Song of Double Time to jump forward to either 6 AM or 6 PM, forcing you to wait for any specific events occurring between those hours. If I needed to be at a specific location to meet a character at, let's say, 5 PM in order to complete one of the many Bomber Notebook side quests, then I would need to risk jumping to another task and hopefully return in time, or I would sit around and do nothing until 5 PM rolled around. So when I first played the 3DS remaster, I immediately fell in love with being able to jump to a specific hour in order to be where I needed to be at a much more efficient time. And now, having played it again, I know I will never want to return to the original's time controls ever again. Now, I do want to point out that the last time I played the original version of Majora's Mask, it was on that Zelda GameCube collection pack, and the reason why I played it on the collection was because I was doing a collection overview over the course of 10 episodes. I used to do that. Every 10 episodes, I would take one game from a collection pack and talk about it. But knowing that now and looking back, I made a huge mistake, as the ROM that was ported to the GameCube collection was filled with tons of game-breaking bugs, which only made my playthrough of Majora 3D so much sweeter. But this time around, I played the original ROM on the Nintendo Wii U and had no issues at all, so my experiences on both versions were virtually great. One of the more fascinating things about the 3DS remake is that once again, Grezzo, the team behind the 3DS version of Ocarina of Time, did this remake as well. But there was a weird caveat here. In the Ocarina 3DS port, the devs left the bugs from the original game in that version, so the fans could have a faithful one-to-one experience while also working hard to improve the experiences made from the past. With Majora's Mask 3DS, they took out all of the bugs and glitches. But because the internet is the internet, I learned and taught myself several new glitches and bugs throughout my playthroughs that once again added to my own little fun journey of replaying this masterpiece. But with the vast highways leading me back to the 3DS version, there were some minor exceptions that had me wishing they hadn't reinvented the wheel here. When Link transforms into a Goron, it's fun as hell. His spinning attack turns Link into a rolling ball of destruction and makes taking down the God boss a grand old time. It's easily the best thing about being a Goron, and unfortunately, it isn't satisfying on the 3DS version. Why? Because the 3DS controls are hypersensitive with the analog stick, and if you're not facing the exact direction you need to be facing, you can easily roll past an enemy or off of a cliff. I found it way easier to correct any mistakes on the Virtual Console controller, while I found myself constantly overcorrecting with the 3DS controls. And as I said earlier, I had more of a speedrunning itch gnawing at me this time around, and I couldn't always scratch it. I had to be more controlled and patient, especially when rolling around the Snowhead Temple. Just wanted to roll, man, but falling off one of these precipices often led to a long climb up. Another major change that I'll highlight is the twin mold boss and the use of the Giant's Mask. After one snake is defeated, you have the opportunity to use the Giant's Mask to destroy the other, making the fight a hell of a lot easier. Now in the original version, the mask drains Link's magic, and when it's depleted, you're back to fighting a normal size. On the 3DS, however, Link remains a big bad giant and can throttle the twin mold to the bitter end with jabs and uppercuts and spinning it by the tail. Now admittedly, it's pretty cool on paper. When applied, however, I found that I'm just bad at it. Fighting the 3DS version of the twin mold was harder for me than it had ever been on the original game, and unfortunately, that carried over in my recent back-to-back playthroughs of both versions. I always managed to struggle with the quick time events, making this battle, well, not so quick time. As cool as it is to see Link bare knuckle a snake, I got more enjoyment out of returning to normal size and letting my sword do the punching. That's more my speed. Another big gripe that I have with Majora 3D is the swimming. Now, most people will say the swimming sucks in both games, and I do agree. And I think in the 3D version, the swimming is overall a bit better. However, the biggest problem I have with the 3D version is the fact that you cannot swim quickly without using the special blue aura boost that drains your meter. I wish it was a toggle, but it's not. This fundamentally led me to either constantly filling up my magic meter all the time or using an infinite magic potion just to ensure that I would never run out of meter. It's kind of frustrating. And what's this? Oh, that's right, it can't be. Oh my lord, folks, here it is. Nintendo heard your cries and they answered in kind. I forgot that Majora's Mask 3DS added a brand new mini fishing game. Now here's the thing, you all know this, maybe you don't, but I'll be honest, I don't care about fishing. It does nothing for me. In fact, as a completionist, all it does is add to the list of things I need to do, and getting every type of fish can literally take hours. Some can only be caught at certain times of certain days, and even then, you have to rely on pretty unforgiving RNG to get the rare ones for your collection. And I get it, there's many of you out there that are totally stoked for this type of stuff, and I'm happy for you. But for me, it's just more work. Perhaps it'd be different if catching every fish granted a super cool item, a new mask, a powerful weapon, or even, I don't know, a cutscene of Link with all of his fish at a kick-ass grill. There's not, it's just fish. It'll also be known that while I did catch every fish, the game does not reward you for catching every fish. Now, if it sounds like I'm griping about a few specks in a super tasty big gulp of Orange Crush, yeah, you're right. Since so many things were done right in correcting the flaws of the game that simply had lower expectations at the time, I couldn't help but find it jarring when the 3DS introduced new flaws in exchange. However, these flaws pale in comparison to the vast improvements made on the re-release. If you're a newcomer to this game and have nothing to compare it to, you probably won't even see these new flaws as flaws. Please trust me when I say that the double-edged sword of remakes swung in our favor this time around and makes Majora's Mask 3DS a resounding improvement on the original. Now, maybe you don't have a 3DS, or maybe your only copy of the game is the old school gold colored N64 cartridge, or maybe you have to deal with the buggy GameCube version like I did for my first playthrough. Well, don't worry. Even though the original version suffers from limitations of its time, you're still going to have an incredibly unique experience, like I did when I was a kid. Check out almost any review or any forum talking about Majora's Mask, and you're bound to hear the same words repeated over and over again. Weird, odd, strange, dark, macabre, depressing, death, toilet hand. But what I found to be even more pervasive is that for every somber moment this game delivers, there's an element of hope, and Link is that hope. I touched on this in my original video, but a little more broadly. Since I teamed up with my man Sunder at the time, we agreed to go heavier on the game's overarching story and a few of the theories within. Playing Majora's Mask this time around, I found myself drawn more into the interpersonal relationships amongst the people of Termina and how Link's involvement affects them. Let's start by saying that there are some odd ducks amongst the citizens of Termina. Many of them are alternate versions of the Hyruleans from Ocarina of Time, but all in all, overflowing with personality. I mean, Tingle. Why not? As odd as they may be, however, they all have habits that need to be studied to complete the Bomber's Notebook, given to you by a group of kids hell-bent on just helping folks out. Kind of a weird thing. By talking to the inhabitants of Termina and getting to know them, you find out that many of them are just simply going through some shit. I'd love to know what made the developers decide to make these interactions a core part of the game.
Boys, I love all these ideas. Keep them coming. Freybe, what do you got?
Okay. You know how Link uses bombs to blow shit up?
Yeah.
Okay. What if Goron Link uses bigger bombs to blow bigger shit up?
I love it. Keep it coming. T-Coons, what do you got?
Okay. What if Deku Link uses these holes to fly up in the air and get cool stuff like heart containers or whatnot?
Good stuff. Good stuff. I love this. I love this. Pat, what are you thinking?
What if Link was like really there for someone? Like at the exact moment they needed him to be there.
Could he have a bomb?
Sure.
With all the stress, loss, and depression that everyone in Termina is going through, your goal is to be there for them. Take Cafe and Anju, for example. These two are betrothed to one another, but doubts and insecurities sink in from both sides. By learning their habits, Link has to jump through numerous hoops in order to pass along the correct information to the correct people, and ultimately get these two to overcome their fears and express their very real love for each other, all while being just hours away from certain death. Through Link, they realize that a union, however brief, is more valuable than dying alone. Let me repeat that one more time. They realize that a union, however brief, is more valuable than dying alone. You know, after defeating Ganon not that long ago, I did not see Link having to be in this position. Fulfillment of this quest rewards Link with the couple's mask, one of many required to exchange for something special. Now allow me to bring things back to Tingle. Yes, we all know Tingle is a weird thing, but a big part of my heart is reserved for him. He will forever be a part of me. I am Tingle. This little guy is 35 years old, and his sole desire is to desperately find a fairy friend. His father is tired of seeing a man his age acting like a child, and Tingle is aware of the disappointment he's caused. Through helping Link, Tingle regains a sense of purpose, and Link serves as the link for opening communication between the two. Once again, Link brings a glimmer of hope into a relationship that was on the verge of falling apart. I love you, Tingle. But Link's altruism isn't limited to healing relationships. He even serves as a grief counselor to a Zora overwhelmed with loss. When Lulu's eggs go missing, her lover, Mikau, seeks them out only to wash up wounded on a beach and later dies. Now, poor Lulu's children are gone. Her lover is dead, and 4th grade Gerard is checking his N64 game cartridge wondering, this is rated E for everyone, right? Well, it was time for me to grow up and become Lulu's champion. I reunited her with her 7 babies and helped her heal by embodying the spirit of her dead lover. When playing this game again as an adult for this show, I realized that Link arguably doesn't belong in this world, yet without his interferences, Lulu wouldn't have gone from a spiraling depression to a spiritual jam session. Yes, her grief would never fully go away, but Link gave Lulu that spark of hope she needed to continue a fulfilling life. As for the other characters, I could spend an hour talking about their sorrows and how Link leads them out of the darkness, but I'd like to quickly shine a light on something that doesn't get as much attention: the Song of Healing. It's a tool Link repeatedly used to restore hope across Termina. One thing I wondered as a kid, even when initially completing Majora's Mask for the show, was why did it sound so somber? Why did a song that eased the restless spirit of a Goron warrior, or bring a tormented, half-mummified father back to his daughter, elicit such a dark tranquility? Well, now that I've revisited the game, I think I have that answer. Hope is the form of healing that pulls the people of Majora's Mask out of despair. The acts of service Link performs for absolute strangers is personified by the Song of Healing. While hope and healing is often seen as something warm and cheerful, it cannot exist unless it comes out of some form of pain or sorrow. Hope and sadness are two sides of the same coin, the yin and yang of existence. And I think I just proved that Nintendo hit the nail on the head way before Pixar did. Like Chopin's Funeral March, the Song of Healing reflects a never-ending cycle of hope and sadness. The two are inevitable, yet comfort lies in being there for each other through both conditions. So for completing Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, rewards mainly come from you doing two things: finding every stray fairy in each of the game's locations, and receiving every single mask. Finding every hidden fairy in an area and returning them to their respective Great Fairy fountains yields different rewards depending on the area. You get things like improved defense with the Great Fairy Sword, which is the most powerful weapon in the game. Now, they actually did a reward switch up between the game's two versions. In the original, the Woodfall Temple Fairies reward you with a spin attack. and the Snowfall Temple fairies reward you with a larger magic meter. For the 3DS version, they flipped it, and I felt from the very first time I played the 3DS version that this was a very great move. It gave me the option to have that improved magic meter while playing through Snowhead Mountain, which meant way more fun rolling around as a big bad Goron. And when recently playing the 3DS on the heels of the original, the benefit of having a larger magic supply sooner was even more obvious. As for the trouble it took me to find all the fairies, doing so has become a significant breeze over time. I remember endlessly searching for these fluttering sprites as a kid with no interest, but maybe that's why the locations are nestled well in my memory. I procured most of them easily in my original Completionist playthrough, and I was able to easily find the stragglers again. And again, that map on the 3DS made things even easier still. And since my back-to-back playthrough of both versions was live streamed, the very few fairies that I did overlook were immediately called out by the numerous fans who live and breathe this game. Majora's Mask's coolest reward, however, comes from obtaining every mask and exchanging them with Majora Kid near the end of the game. Doing this yields the super awesome, badass looking fierce deity mask. I get excited every time I get this bad boy, and no matter what version I'm playing, it's no different. This mask turns Link into a souped up adult version of himself and makes fighting bosses ridiculously easy. I love the game's overall gameplay, but being able to stomp on the enemies as this all-powerful version of myself is so satisfying. Because of the trials I went through to get it, I felt like I earned it. I feel as though I have grown up and could take on the world. But beyond that, what you get is not much. A small red seal appears on the bomber's notebook when you complete it on the 3DS. That's a nice little confirmation that, hey, that's it. I can't really ask for more though, since finishing each side quest already rewards Link with something like a heart fragment or a mask. It would have been damn nice to get something for catching every single fish in the game, especially since that takes so damn long, but otherwise, there's nothing new, and I am okay with that. I will always be okay with that. I go into this game knowing that the real treasures are the friendships I made along the way, and I will stone cold stunner anyone who disagrees with that sentiment. Majora's Mask is a rare game for me where completing and finishing are one and the same, and I will never not play it without completing it. In my journey of recompleting Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask and Majora's Mask 3D, there were 25 hours played, straight through with a short break between the games. 0 deaths in the original version and about 3 in the 3D version. I'm a fierce deity, baby. Come at me, bro. 48 masks received twice, culminating in a trade for the fierce deity mask. 26 ocarina songs learned, ranging from manipulating time to making a scarecrow appear. 40 entries made in the bomber's notebook. 13 bottles collected, 6 in the original and 7 on the 3DS. And 2 Khalil brothers who in 1998 had their minds blown by a twisted-ass Zelda game.
I never would have dreamt as a kid, passing the controller back and forth to my big brother, that I would be one day talking to hundreds of thousands of people about the 5 times I completed Majora's Mask. I never would have dreamt that the game would be remastered into something even better than I was used to experiencing at the time. And now, looking back on those 5 playthroughs, I can honestly see how this game helped mold me into the person I am today. Nintendo went far out on a limb by abandoning a cut-and-dry good versus evil narrative to give us a weird experience that somehow managed to get more real than any other Zelda game in my eyes. Now, there are intricacies to this game that maybe I didn't fully understand as a kid, but like a fine piece of classical music, I was able to appreciate it more over time. But that can only be done by going the extra mile to helping everyone in the game that you can. And no amount of fishing and catching will ever take away my enjoyment from doing just that. So, with that in mind, guys, I give The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask and Majora's Mask 3D its completionist rating of Complete It.
Complete it!